it, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me this morning. Due to the tragic news we received this week in the Israel of the immeasurably sad passing of Benji Steinbach, we have changed our programme and moved away from the play reading. So at fairly short notice, and something that I haven't done since my A-level literature classes at Southampton High School some 40 plus years ago, here I am doing a book review. Most of the books I'm reading at the moment are either books we've reviewed in our coffee morning or those that you've recommended, so I'm continuously catching up. I've actually chosen to review and discuss two books, actually. I think I said actually twice. One is My Bonnie by John Suchet, and the other one is The Longest Farewell by Nuala Suchet. Clearly these books are connected, and their connection will become apparent. I hope it will also become evident that fractured worlds and broken hearts can heal. My Bonnie is a love story with a very cruel twist of fate. The love that never expires, but the pain that is carried is huge. John Suchet, who many of us will know from his time as a journalist, reporter, and ITN broadcaster, tells his story, focusing particularly on the love of his life, sadly torn away from him by early onset dementia. The book is very cleverly crafted, if slightly confusing at the beginning, as John weaves together the present, his struggle with Bonnie's dementia, and his past, his life story. He chronicles his first marriage to a woman who was the first girl he ever kissed. And although it was a volatile and combustive marriage, he tries to make a life together with her and their 3 sons, until, and he writes, my attention has been caught by the young blonde who lived in the house at the top of the slope. I knew profoundly, totally, without a shred of doubt that this would be my ideal woman. Around her shone an aura of calm. Time goes on, they inevitably fall in love, despite causing considerable heartbreak to both families. They have 5 sons between them. Bonnie becomes John's guiding light, helping him to put his career back on track after a disastrous stint as an ITN reporter based in Washington for a few years. She encourages him to be reunited with his parents after many years of estrangement orchestrated by John's first wife. John and Bonnie traveled extensively, bought a home in France that they loved. They wined, dined, partied, and worked hard. Chaim Dvash, life was sweet. Until February 2006, after struggling for 2 years, Bonnie, in her mid-60s, was diagnosed with early onset dementia. Life became increasingly challenging for John. Bonnie was totally unaware of her declining abilities. She maintained her calm, sweet nature, but John was guilt-ridden and failing miserably to look after her adequately. Michelle, can I have the first film clip, please?
Sorry, I should have been slightly more organized, but I was completely wrapped up in what you were saying. Sorry about that. Let me just...
It's the one of just John on his own.
Yeah, I have lined them all up. It's just... I was completely wrapped in what you were saying. Sorry. There we go. Can you hear?
No. No.
In the world, and what man wouldn't want that? She is physically beautiful. The very first time I ever saw her, it was like looking at Grace Kelly. I've gone from being her lover to her carer. And that's heartbreaking.
Can you hear?
Not so well.
A little bit now, it's stopped.
Whole of my life, as a journalist, a reporter, as a newscaster, I knew what was happening and I was in control. control. Suddenly, I'm not in control anymore. This is happening despite me, and it makes me angry. Bon is contented. I go to see her, and she's in a care home. She's now been in for 6 or 7 months. She's never once asked me where she is, why she's there, where have I been, what have I been up to, all the sort of things a normal wife would ask. No questions at all. She is contented. I'm not. I know. I remember what she's forgotten. I still have the memories that she's now lost. So dementia can get the carer too. You find yourself grieving. You're mourning. You're going through the grieving process for someone who is still alive. If I'm with her in the care home and I whiz off to talk to one of the carers, when I come back, she greets me as if she hasn't seen me for days. And I took her to Venice, and we had just the most wonderful, wonderful holiday ever. And the illness had already begun. But she loved it, and now she doesn't remember a thing about it. The Bonnie I loved, I have lost. Bonnie is still there, and I still love her. This is a different Bonnie. That's what this vile disease does.
Thank you, Michelle.
Oh,
In September 2009, after 5 years of trying his best, Bonnie became a resident at Sundial Care Home. During the transition from their flat to the care home, the care home managers came to see her in her own home. They were very kind to John, and they said to him, "In Sundial, whatever she does will be right. Here in your flat, obviously she makes mistakes, continence accidents, not using her knife properly. With us, she does nothing wrong. We learn from her and we adapt to her. It will help her self-esteem. We will look after her." The Longest Farewell, the second book that I'm reviewing, started in 2004 when James Black, a happy and successful filmmaker, is diagnosed with Pick's disease, a very rare form of dementia that affects the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. Over the next 5 years, his dearly loved wife of 20 years, Nuala, becomes his carer, nurse, and mother. She writes, "My role as wife and lover has to be surrendered and is gone forever." Nuala and James had met in Africa when he was shooting a wildlife program and she was working on the artistic side of the set. Nuala suggests, words familiar to us, their meeting was beshet, Yiddish for being together was meant to be. Just like the Souchets, their lives were successful, busy, and deeply committed in their love for one another. Nuala eventually concedes that she can no longer cope and is at breaking point. She is recommended to place James in Sundial. "The knowledge that we will never live together again," she writes, "annihilates me. I wallowed in the no mores. No more James and Nuala. No more living together. No more hugging each other to sleep. No more arms outstretched to greet me. The crying will not stop. Grief has me by the throat. But there is light at the end of this very dark tunnel." Michelle, can I ask you for the second clip, please?
An incredibly difficult book to read in many parts, actually, Nuala. The Longest Farewell, about your husband James and his dementia. And it is about the fact, as much as there are lots of dark moments, but the book is about the fact that there is a beginning after the ending.
yeah.
and you just felt compelled to write this for some reason. What was it that spurred you on?
I think I wrote it to stay close to James initially. It was my one way of holding on to him. And by writing about him, I could keep him close to me. And I think that was the main reason I started to write the book.
Of course. Well, as we say, you both were going through very difficult times. And I'll let you explain how you met.
Well, we met in the care home, actually, which is a very romantic place to meet. I'd met John's wife, Bonnie, long before I met John, and I got to know her. Her room was right next door to James. And neither of us were coping very well, and the care home manager one day suggested that we should have a lunch to talk. I had never actually met John in the home. We'd obviously always, appeared to miss each other. And she organised this lunch, and at the lunch, John started talking about how he wasn't coping, and his words just, reached me in a way that I thought, this is someone who knows exactly what I'm going through. We were spouses, not parents. Most of the care home patients were parents with elderly children. We were spouses with, younger spouses with our partners gone in dementia. So it was an incredible connection that he knew exactly what I was going through. And we emailed each other for about a year. And then we agreed to meet, and, we had a meal, and, we went to concerts and theatres and things like that. It wasn't an easy journey. We had many ups and downs. It was difficult having a friendship with someone when your husband was still alive and still breathing, even though you had no connection with him. It was really, really difficult relating to someone that had no past with me. James was my past, was my everything. But eventually, we had lots of ups and downs. We had a disastrous, dinner. Then we had a disastrous weekend in Vienna, and then we had an even more disastrous holiday. So between it all, at the end, we came through it all, and I lost James first, and then, Bonnie died, and then we're here.
You're here. And John, you described a lot of this period as with the big G, the guilt.
Yes.
And a lot of people will understand that, obviously, because I guess you feel like you've found happiness again, and it's difficult to deal with in amongst tragedy and loss.
Everyone who is involved with dementia, cares for someone with dementia at some time, feels guilt. And we used to call it the big G on your shoulder. If you start enjoying yourself, hang on a minute, I shouldn't be enjoying myself. I'm living with someone with dementia. But I had a very good Admiral nurse who advised me, and he said to me, you have to understand, what would they want for you if they knew? What would you want for them if it was the other way round? Who are you actually hurting by forming a new relationship? No one. And finally, if you don't get out there and get a life, then dementia's got you too. Two for the price of one. Don't let that happen. And one very good bit of advice I was given by an Admiral nurse was, here's how to deal with guilt. Get a very sharp knife, just cut along the front of your head here, open it up, reach inside, lift out the guilt, put it on a table, close your head and walk on by. And you know what? When you're in the grips of dementia, that's really good advice.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Okay, so both Daniel and I have experienced dementia and the cruel demise of both our fathers. We felt you lose them twice, once when they forget their identities, and then when they pass away. I've spoken enough. I'd like to hear from you if you've had personal experiences, friends, family. Is there sufficient care provision? How was, and also what do you feel about them coming together while both spouses were alive?
Well, I was very moved by what your presentation was. Beautiful, Sharon. I've experienced dementia for the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years. My father had it, a very long time. I think as they say, to be the partner has it much harder, because my mother was basically having a breakdown. She was okay when my father had dementia. She was having a nervous breakdown trying to deal with it at home, and I had to make the decision as the only child, that my father had to go into a home. And that was the hardest thing, because she wanted to look after him. The minute he was in the home, he was totally happy, and he sat there holding hands with another woman who he thought was my mother. And every time my mother came, I had to pull him away from this other woman. It was terrible. He was totally content there, as John says with his wife. It's very, very hard for the spouse. So I lost my father, and then he died a number of years later. And my mother, 20 years ago, had a stroke, which affected her brain. It's also got dementia, so I've lost, but she's still alive. So yeah, it's terrible. I think people don't realise. When I went for a walk, I did a marathon for Alzheimer a few years ago, and I was deeply disappointed with my friends because hardly anybody sponsored me. I don't think they realised exactly what Alzheimer is. If you say you're going for cancer or for high or for something else, people will support you, and I didn't get the support that I thought I should have got.
Do you feel that there's not enough understanding? I mean, even now about Alzheimer's and dementia, that it's not on the same scale, say, or level of understanding as cancer. I mean, cancer had to struggle to get there, to actually be,
Yes, I think it does. I think unless people have experienced it firsthand, they don't realise that how devastating it is. And I think it's wonderful that John found this other lady. I think
could it be that people are so scared for themselves of what might happen to them, should it happen to them, that they find it very hard to look at and to examine too closely? Because
we're all scared of getting any illness. I suppose because it's a mental illness, it's perhaps it's worse. Yes.
I was struck by the resemblance of his second wife
yes.
to his first.
Yes, I also thought that. Yes.
I mean, they were both extremely beautiful women, and that there was just, I mean, Bonnie was stunningly beautiful, but his third wife, Nuala, looked very much like her. It was a type. It was quite interesting, I thought.
Well, they were really thrown together in the care home, weren't they? They were, I think, the only two in that situation. And you read the book, I mean, for ages, their conversations it's almost a competition of, well, she did this, or well, he did that, James did this, or Bonnie did this. And it brings comfort, but she dives in and out of the relationship. She can't cope with being involved with somebody. She is so, I don't know if it's because he's a sort of ahead of her time-wise, but she cannot cope with a new relationship.
And does she have children?
Who can't cope? Nuala, you mean, the new wife? Who can't cope?
Nuala doesn't cope with at the beginning of her relationship with John Suchet.
Well, it depends how long it is that it's like after divorce, going one relationship to another. It depends on the time. Some people can go quickly and some people can't. It's just.
Somebody asked if she had children. No, she didn't. She and James didn't have any children.
Right, so they were very much lived for each other. He was completely her focus in the marriage. Right, so you can understand why that would be almost more difficult for her to make the transition.
Yeah, I think they both had brief first marriages, actually.
Yeah.
I think very early on, and they were sort of short, and they didn't have children from previous marriages either. And then they met, and
He had children from the first marriage, though, didn't he?
He had 3 boys.
3. And did they keep in touch with him?
Yes, very much so. Well, the first wife was a very interesting character, and the divorce was very bitter. Child custody was a huge issue. In the end, actually, she decided, I think she was originally American, she wanted to go back, and this was his opportunity to force her hand about access to the children. And then things began to turn round. Yes, they have both, he and Bonnie have very close relationship with each other's, their own and each other's children.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry, Evelyn, carry on. No, so there was a film out a few years ago, and I'm just desperately trying to remember the name, about a very intelligent university lecturer who had
Alice.
early onset. Was it Finding Alice, Losing Alice? It was about
Something.
Alice. And it's the same thing, that picture of the care home when she doesn't recognise she makes a new relationship because she doesn't know she's got an old one.
So Juliana Moore, it was a very difficult watch. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. I remember that.
4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Again, worth seeing for this sort of story.
But somebody asked before about people not really understanding. And I remember towards the end of my father's life when he really couldn't do anything. And people used to say, but you can talk to him, or he can walk to the loo, and unless also very often these people are hidden because their care level, their care needs are intense. They're either in a care home or, well, unless you've got people there or you're really a very, very good, kind-natured person, you don't tend to venture. I remember about a week before my father died, we had gone to we'd gone for my mum's birthday to Bournemouth for Shavuos. It was her first holiday in 5 years, and we went as a family. And we'd set up a rota of friends to cover, to make sure to go into the home, make sure he was okay, sort of thing. And it was weird the way the timing worked out, because then he passed away, and a lot of my friends actually saw and understood what had been going on in our lives for the last 5, 6, 8, 10 years. And it's like anything, a picture paints 1,000 words. Till you still see and experience something, you know, you don't.
Because the illness is internal, I suppose. If you look at often people who have Alzheimer's, certainly at the early stages, they don't necessarily look any different. It's not like a physical, well, there's physical manifestations. So I suppose it would be hard to understand.
Very slow process. At the beginning, I thought it was just like senior moments, but he used to then say, my father used to say ridiculous things, like the table shrunk, just like your table shrunk and it's got smaller, and he just didn't realise it didn't make sense. It's a very slow process for him. It was. It depends. I suppose it varies.
I think the early onset becomes much faster.
Yes.
I have a cousin whose wife went from being a leading light to absolutely helpless and couldn't do anything, and is at a ridiculously young age in Schonfeld Square. Yeah. And you just think, oh, that's when you say thank you, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a woman that actually lives in the adjoining block to me. I think maybe some of you might know her, so I'm not going to mention her name, but she's got onset of dementia, and I actually phone her to see how she is. She phones me back, and and I talk to her for a few minutes, and then she says the same thing over and over again. But in the beginning, you would think there was absolutely nothing wrong with her, and she goes out with her husband and she looks normal, but she has got the onset, and it's very sad. I think it's getting worse now. But she actually picks up the phone and phones me. Hello, how are you, Judy?
Sharon, can I ask you about John Suchet? He's Jewish, isn't he?
His father was Jewish, South African.
Oh, his father. Because they're a family. Isn't he the brother of the actor? I forget the Poirot.
David. David.
He actually talks about going to South Africa. They take his father after the mother passes away. John takes his dad. I think Bonnie encourages him, says, "Come on, let's take your dad back to South Africa. He's getting older. Let him go and see all the family and everything." Well, they had sort of disowned him after he'd married John's mum because she wasn't Jewish, and he has the most wonderful holiday with his family and reconnects with everyone. And after that, he starts, declining, but they do have that time together. There are some photos in the book of them all together.
That on the motorbike, was that time?
Sorry, say that.
That picture where they're sitting in the sunshine laughing on a motorbike or something, is that from that time?
No, I don't know. I think it's one of their holidays.
It looks like the Venice holiday.
Yes, I
It
mean,
looks like the most wonderful time.
Yeah.
they had amazing, and they found this rundown house in France because they're supposed to stay somewhere and they didn't end up getting to that place, and they stayed somewhere else. Then they went to an estate agent. This whole sort of thing unravels, and they found the house and the people who own it. They become very dear friends with them, and they renovate the place. And he says he sells it afterwards because he cannot go there without them. He tries. And the little village are all very supportive of him. It's that he can't go.
Do they talk in the book about feeling guilt about putting their spouses into a care home and not being able to look after them at home, each of them?
Oh, yes. She becomes really physically unwell, emaciated, not coping. Till they say to her, you're actually, you need to do this for him. You need to do it for yourself, but James needs to go into professional care. And it was the same with John and Bonnie. Both Nuala and John do everything. Their lives, it's not, they just can't cope. They can't cope, and they feel they're not actually doing the best for their spouses who are so unwell.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It just sounds like maybe it just depends on the dementia and what it's doing to the person, but it sounds like for them, their spouses are happier in the home. They don't have the consciousness of remembering what they're not having, and they're like, like Jenny, you're saying about your father.
My father didn't realise where he was. He thought it was at home. And when I was there, he said, well, tell mummy to bring the food from the kitchen now,
Yeah.
He thought he was at home. He was in Sage. He was very comfortable. It's his spouse who has a hard time.
Yeah.
And every time my mother came, he was holding this hand of this other woman who looked a bit like my mother. I had to pull it. She would have broken her heart, so I had to pull him away from her.
Yeah.
Sharon, I've written down something you said. He says, I remember what she has forgotten. That was really powerful. So all her memories have disappeared, but he still has her memories. He still remembers for her in a way.
That's why it's so, I think that's why it's so
Heartbreaking.
painful. So painful for him. Yeah.
May I ask a question? I mean, we're all becoming much more aware of Alzheimer's. In the last, 10, 20 years, it's become something that people do talk about, even if they don't want to admit it's within their own families. Are we better within our community at dealing with caring for people who've got these serious mental illnesses? Or is it like the wider community, the UK, who are trying very, very hard with Alzheimer's awareness? Are we better? Do we do it? Do we put more in? Are we looking after them better? Sundial sounds amazing.
Are you talking about Jewish?
I'm talking about Jewish. I mean, I know Sage, but I was just thinking, are we better with looking after, within the Jewish community, our own sick?
No. I'm not sure that we are. I mean, I don't know about the care homes themselves. I'm just talking about awareness. We're still on the path of trying to make ourselves aware, having mental health weekends. Shabbat last week, the week before, we had mental health Shabbat. We've still got to get there. I mean, we really do. I don't think we can just say, oh, I'm having a really bad patch, I'm going to go to a clinic, I'm going to speak to a psychiatrist, I'm going to book in for a course with a psychiatrist or psychologist. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think it's, America has been saying for years, oh, my psychologist says this, or...
Are you talking about stigma? Are you talking about stigma here?
Yeah, I'm talking about stigma.
That's different. That's mental illness as opposed to Alzheimer's is a different thing. Mental illness is different.
Isn't it all tied up in the same thing?
No, I don't.
To some extent.
I don't think so.
I think as a community, and certainly historically, being Jewish, you were very ashamed if a member of your family had any kind of mental illness, let alone a dementia.
Yeah. Did anybody see some years ago on television there was a docudrama about a grandmother taking her two grandchildren. She was going to buy them pizza and chips or something. And on the way, she has a stroke driving the car. And the stroke results in her dementia. And her two daughters, the mother of these two kids and a sister, try to look after her. And ultimately, they put her into a home. And it's the most disgusting place you've ever come across. I mean, they totally leave her to her own devices and don't help her and whatever and whatever. And these are not Jewish people. These are stump people in England. And they go from place to place to place to place to try and find somewhere that will adequately serve her needs. You know, she just needed somebody to be kind and to be responsible. And they left her sitting on the loo all night one night, and they didn't care. They were totally rubbish. And they finally found one place, and of course they couldn't afford it. It was the only place that they could go to, and they ultimately went to find funding or whatever it was. But it showed you how bad the regular places are at looking after people like that, and you have to really hunt for something.
The Haredi world definitely hasn't got an attitude where if you're different, you're not accepted. I taught in a Haredi school for 8 years, and I was taking out a special needs child to help him. And then once I was told, all of a sudden I was called in, you mustn't take out Shlomi anymore. I can't remember his name. And I said, why? This child was 8 years old, definitely special needs. Because if you carry on taking him out, it will spoil his shidduch chances when he's older. He's defined as being different.
I do want to say that Schonfeld Square, I've been there. I think they do an amazing job. I think I've been in quite a few care homes, and I was in the care industry for 15 years. And I still do some work in that field, and they're actually, I think it's a good setup.
Well, my mother was in Schonfeld Square, and I haven't got such good memories of it. So, but I'm not going to lambast them. If you have good memories, great.
Well, it was just what I view. But there's also things like there's something called, I mean, a lot of it is about money. It's about being able to finance things. And
that wasn't the problem with my mother.
But there is something called continuing healthcare funding, which is a non-means tested form of funding that people with very high level of care needs when the Alzheimer's becomes very advanced.
That's what they found for this woman in the end.
You're very lucky if you got it, because you've got to be half dead. My mother can't walk, she's paralysed, and she can't get continuing care because she's got use of her right arm and she can put the food in her mouth by herself. So she can't get it, and she can't do anything by herself besides put the food that's all in her mouth. But we couldn't get it.
I'll chat with you afterwards, Jenny, about it, because.
But I get help from the claims conference now.
Sharon, can I just ask you, those books, did you feel? Do they uplift you? Are they depressing? When you finished reading them, what's your sense? How do you feel?
Interesting question, because I read my Bonnie not long after my father died. Right. It took many years to recover from his illness. I wasn't his spouse. I had, thank God, my own family. You know, I walked away from it. I came home. I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed through it. The longest farewell, I think, when I saw them sort of, because obviously with my Bonnie, he hasn't got together with Nuala at that stage. So, and I was pleased that they did. It's funny, Daniel and I have a different approach to it. He's like really negative that they got together while their spouses were so unwell. Whereas I felt that I understood it.
They needed support. Yeah,
I understood it. So I think the second one, as you say, there was light at the end of the tunnel, and they were very fortunate enough to meet each other and start a life again together. But it's thinking back, I probably had, I mean, people say I'm having a nervous breakdown. I probably had a bit of a nervous breakdown during the years and after my father died, because I found it so insurmountable. And then my father-in-law got it, but I was that one step removed. Yeah, and I just tried to do my best to support the family. Yeah, he actually got a very big package of funding, because sadly he was very agitated and aggressive, and so he had one-to-one care, etc., all funded by the local authority.
I don't know.
You were fortunate.
I've had one-to-one care for 20 years for my mother.
I just think about it, Jenny, if I can help you.
Terrible.
I think, Michelle, we're 11
We
o'clock
are,
already. I
we
can't
are.
believe
Can
it.
I just plug Sharon for a minute, because
Amazing.
Sharon, you do work with the funding, don't you? And so if anybody knows anybody who has experience of dementia and is having difficulty, can I guide them towards you, Sharon?
Pleasure, I'd be happy to help. Yeah, with pleasure.
Oh, excellent.
You can take it up with the authority, and you've had a lot of experience in that. So
Yeah, I mean, it's about somebody's healthcare needs. They write in the end of the book, Nuala writes in particular, how there is not enough funding, that the government does not realise the seriousness and the acute deterioration and the care needs of somebody, because you could have, like Nuala, James and Bonnie at the beginning, they're still walking about there, but they have very high level of care needs. Yeah, different care needs. So it's something she mentions at the end of the book. Yes, I'd be happy to. Please
It was
click.
very nice that you gave that you showed us the clip of them together, that they found each other. They found a suitable.
And how you? Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Sharon, that was very, very helpful. I think one of the problems we have is whether deep loyalty to your spouse actually condemns you to be lonely at that time forever. Like you're not allowed any happiness because you still have a living spouse.
It's complicated, isn't it?
Very complicated, but it was very moving. Sharon, it was a lovely, lovely piece. Thank you so much.
It was a first for me, so thank you for your support.
You did brilliantly. It was heartfelt.
Really nice, really
I
nice.
think that was beautiful.
On the chats you've got, let me just read out. Thank you, Sharon, for an excellent and very moving presentation. And another one, most salutary and moving session. Thank you. Really beautifully put together, Sharon. And I do like the way that you've taken the difficulty, the dimension, we've discussed that, but also that from that very dimension they met in the care home, they could find their own way out and the way towards healing. And I think that's at this time as well for us, it's a fantastic message, and that we can keep that with us. So thank you very, very much.
And well done for preparing that in 2 days.
I haven't done anything else. There's been no supper, no nothing for 2 days.
So we acknowledge it. Thank you very much. That was brilliant.
Monica, next week.
Oh yes, totally different atmosphere. We're going to talk about Jane Austen and think about anything that's written today or in the last few years or whenever that you think might be read and loved in 200 years time. It might be, so come with your sort of what will be the next classic. Why do we still love books that were written at the beginning of the 19th century? And that's it. Have a good week, everyone. And thanks again, Sharon. That was really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. That was lovely.
Thank you.
It was excellent, Sharon.
Jenny.
Bye.
Jenny.
Who's talking to me?
It's Ruth Becht.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi. That was